The Octopus Hitman. Listener discretion advised.
Gambling, guns, drugs, and deception, murder, betrayal, and the U.S. government. When these collide, chaos erupts, and the lines between justice and crime blur. In a world where everyone has something to hide, no one escapes unscathed.
And welcome to The Octopus Hitman. This is episode 9, and just a quick introduction, of course. I am your host, Bill. To my left, the amazing researcher, James.
Hello, everybody.
And the man who knows how to touch diodes. It's Mark.
Hello.
I don't know if Mark likes the diode.
I don't think I want to be a diode toucher.
I think you are a diode.
Can I be a diode tweaker at least?
No.
So we just to give you an idea, we were on episode 8, and that was titled The Octopus. And now this is episode 9, The Hitman. Now we're putting it all together and why we're calling it The Octopus Hitman and why all this random stuff, it's all going to hopefully try to come together here. So let's get to it.
So we talked about the Cabazon tribe in our last episode. So the tribe at this point is beginning to think that John Phillip Nichols is stealing money from them. That they're making money from the cigarette store and the gambling. Specifically, Fred Alvarez, who was their vice chairman, and he went into John Phillip Nichols' office and stole documents that showed that they were stealing money, that they weren't reporting all the money that they should to the tribe.
Well, it makes sense because they were seeing a lot of money and a lot of people coming onto the reservation to spend money at the smoke shop and the casino. And a lot of money is passing hands, but it's never coming back to the tribe. They're not seeing anything come back to raise up their reservation.
No, in fact, they were going deeper in debt.
Correct.
And not only that, though, they are getting heat from the local authorities. They don't like them gambling. They don't like them selling cigarettes, and they're getting political pressure to not do all those things.
Well, and they have a pool of money as the tribe, and that debt just keeps growing.
Exactly.
And they're wondering why with gambling and why with the cigarettes, they can see the business, like Mark said, that they're doing. They're just not seeing any money from it.
And John Phillip Nichols is saying, it takes time, you guys. It takes time.
Correct. So on July 1st, 1981, Alvarez, at age 32, and his friends Patricia Castro, 44, and Ralph Arthur Boger, 32, were found shot dead behind a home on Bob Hope Drive, just outside Rancho Mirage city limits. All were fatally shot in the head. No other marks were found on the bodies. A detective said at the time that it was unusual none had been shot in the back while trying to run away.
So this is a total assassination. And Fred Alvarez was just about to go to the cops with all of this information that he stole while he was doing his little sleuth type stuff.
Correct.
So they knew the assassin because they weren't running away.
That's the theory, because they were in the backyard around like a fire pit in like 3 lawn chairs. And the theory is the murderer walked between 2 of them, shot 2 of them in the head, and shot the other one in the head from a very close distance.
So probably all within less than 5 seconds.
So they more than likely knew the person that killed them.
Wow.
They're just sitting in the backyard, hanging out.
And it's interesting, too, that, I mean, you know, Fred Alvarez, 32 years old, and he was the head of the vice chairman, you said.
Correct.
Right? So, I mean, this is a tribe of 26 people. And so these were the leaders, and they just got assassinated.
Correct.
So that's interesting because I'm wrong place, wrong time, or those 2 were involved and knew because Fred Alvarez was telling them what he was going to do.
I think wrong place, wrong time. I'm sure he was telling them what to do, and they didn't have any time because he was going to go the next morning. His friends came to pick him up, and that's when they found him. So they knew he was going to go turn them in.
Wow.
And there was no time. Kill now.
Right. And so what he must have told a lot of people because it got back to the bad guys somehow. How did that happen?
That's an inside job going on there.
Yeah.
Or he was bugged.
Oh, yeah. That could be true, too.
He could have easily been bugged.
Wow.
You would think if it's an operation like that, they might even add a security camera, and he didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, imagine how terrified the other 23 tribe members are now. I mean, they've got to be terrified. There's a killer that just killed 3 of your main people.
Yeah.
Correct.
So no one's going to be talking now. Everyone's going to be shutting up and just being quiet.
Right. And they're probably going to get in line with John Phillip Nichols, who's running everything.
Probably.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Correct. And so nothing really comes of this case. It's because it's on tribal land. The police really have no jurisdiction on tribal land.
And there's no evidence other than rounds in a head.
And there's nobody wants to investigate because Nichols is in charge. And they pretty much just let it go. Nothing happens.
Wow.
Because remember, tribal land is not federal land.
Yeah,
it's totally different rules and laws.
Well, and John Phillip Nichols doesn't just sit back on his laurels because things start happening over the next 2 months after that murder.
Correct.
A lot of things start happening. You have more and more people showing up on the tribal land, not to gamble, not to buy cigarettes, but to watch weapons being used out there on the fields and in the dirt. And we're talking automatic weapons, laser, night vision, tank rounds, a ton of stuff that were just coming into play with new technology.
Correct. Cabazon and Nichols and Whack and Hunt, because Whack and Hunt wanted that area to use for gun running, basically, making shells, making ammo. So they were using military testing out there to test these weapons because there's nobody around to see it.
Yeah. And to be clear, if we haven't talked about it before, Cabazon Indian Reservation was teaming up with Whack and Hunt Corporation that makes a lot of ammunition and military supplies.
Correct.
Right? And that's also why Michael Riconosciuto is involved there. He's the guy helping develop all of the weapons there at the tribal.
Along with the CIA.
Exactly.
And well, you'd ask yourself, there's got to be a community nearby. How do they not hear about this stuff going on? I want to give you a perspective. This is back in the 80s, and you've got near Indio, California, Southern California, where Coachella is. And so it's out in the middle of nowhere.
Middle of
then.
nowhere.
No one's going to hear it.
Nope. And even if they are, they can't do anything anyway. It's Indian land.
That's true.
It's reservation. You can't go on it.
That's right. So you're hearing all of these gun testing. They can't do anything. It's sovereign land. Right?
And honestly, you're not hearing it. I mean, if you're the tribe, you might hear it.
Right. But it's so far away from anything else that people aren't hearing.
And I don't know what excuse they were probably giving the tribe. Hey, we're working with some people. Don't worry about it. Blah, blah, blah. Who knows?
Well,
but anybody that's not on the land is probably not going to hear it.
Well, and the tribe did say to other people who finally came in later and said they were witness to watching people who were coming in suits. It's kind of strange for a weapons test. And foreign dictators, which turned out to be generals from Nicaragua. So they were coming onto this Indian reservation land to watch these weapons being used and tested. Why in the world are we have foreign people come in to look at American weapons?
Well, they can do it, number one, because it is a sovereign nation, right? So they can come in and they can invite anybody they want to.
And you can't sell those guns out in the open to Nicaragua at the time. Instead, you're doing it clandestine. And you're like, you've seen movies. Look at these guns we have to sell you. You have cash? Great. We'll take it.
Right.
Because Congress is not going to approve that. The government's not going to approve that on a normal channel. So we go back channel and we'll sell you these truckloads of guns. You give us a bag of cash.
Exactly. And those guys in suits, who are they? Are they CIA, NSA? Who are they?
Yeah.
So a lot of people think that these were people that were tied to the Reagan administration.
Of course they were.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones trying to, especially Nicaraguan generals there, they're trying to help them overthrow the government at the time.
Well, and what a great way to actually get rid of anybody who was going to tell on you. Hey, they're gone now. Cold case. No one's investigating. And all that money we were getting from the casino and the smoke shop and everywhere else, we can use it to make more weapons.
Yeah. And if the CIA is involved, they could just make that all go away.
But, eventually that money is going to run out. If people are not putting as much money in as the weapons that they're trying to make, technology is expensive, very expensive.
And one of the big financiers for this was a person named Paul Morosco.
So Paul Morosco was a gentleman. He was actually working with Michael Riconosciuto, and he was the financier of all the drug money that Michael Riconosciuto was making. Keep in mind, Michael Riconosciuto, boy genius, is making lasers. He's making
underwater drug labs.
Right. Goggles for night vision goggles. And he's also making meth, right?
Correct.
So this is an old story that you've heard before where they're making meth, they're selling it on the street, and Paul Morosco is his childhood friend. They're very good buddies. And he's the guy that has all the monies and all the Swiss bank accounts, with John Phillip Nichols looking on, as well as Michael Riconosciuto's father, Marshall, who is
Involved
somewhere.
in the government somewhere.
Exactly. And we don't know exactly.
And so where do you get money for a clandestine operation, since the CIA can't just go to the American public and say, hey, we'd like to raise your taxes for this? You're going to get it from somewhere. An offshore account seems like the perfect way to do it.
Exactly.
Yes.
So how do you get to that money that's in the offshore accounts? How do you get a hold of it? Because they're just not going to open the bank account and give it to you.
So Marshall Riconosciuto, who is Michael Riconosciuto's father, along with John Phillip Nichols, meet with a third party.
Do you know what the name of that third party was?
His name was Jason Smith.
The name we've actually mentioned in a previous podcast.
Well, Jason Smith is Philip Arthur Thompson.
His pseudonym.
Right. And so this is his pseudonym, being an FBI informant. And they devise a plan to get Paul Morosco's money.
So they met in San Francisco at a restaurant called Vanessi's, and they could see Paul Morosco's apartment from the window of the restaurant.
Exactly.
And they told Jason Smith, a.k.a. Philip Arthur Thompson, he's right over there. Just head right up there and get what you need from him. So he did.
Take care of it.
And what ends up happening is Michael Riconosciuto goes to visit Paul Morosco one day and discovers his lifeless body. So instead of immediately calling the cops, Michael Riconosciuto, this is his best friend from high school or junior high, he drives back to Cabazon. He is afraid for his life.
Wouldn't you be?
I would be, yeah. So he goes back to the Cabazon, and he actually calls his lawyer, and the lawyer calls the police and lets them in on Paul Morosco's dead body.
So he was found dead in his San Francisco home, hogtied and suffocated, which pointed to a calculated and brutal killing. While the crime scene indicated torture, the motive for his death was still a little murky.
Exactly. So basically, his legs were tied to a rope to his neck. And if he got tired, he was going to end up choking himself.
Good old Japanese torture.
Yeah.
You got to figure it took him hours, if not possibly a day or two, to die.
Oh, it might have taken just minutes. You get hogtied and see how long you can hold your legs up. If I tied you hogtied right now, how long could you hold it? 15 minutes? Half an hour? It wouldn't be very long.
Why are you smiling when you say that?
Lay down, put your legs up and your hands back. How long could you stay like that? Not very long.
That's a slow death if you try and stay alive.
Well, you're basically strangling yourself, but
Yeah.
you can't hold your legs and arms that long. You're going to get tired.
So whatever ended up happening, all of a sudden, Paul Morosco's bank accounts are emptied.
Look at that.
Isn't that amazing? So somehow, someone got a whole bunch of drug money, so probably to be able to fund all of these weapons manufacturing.
Well, and they're eliminating a piece of the pie. They now have the money and nobody to tell on them.
Exactly.
Millions of dollars, by the way.
Right. And they probably will figure that they can replace Paul Morosco because he's just the money guy, right?
Correct.
So if he's not making the meth, that's it.
Correct. And Jason Smith is the suspect, although nobody really knows what happened.
Exactly. So now the police start to investigate this murder, and they're talking about a Jason
Obviously.
Smith. Yeah. And they start, going down the rabbit hole, and they know about Jason Smith. They know he's an FBI informant, and they find out that Jason Smith, Philip Arthur Thompson, has not only probably done this murder, but he has also been hired by Marshall Riconosciuto to babysit Michael Riconosciuto.
Correct.
So he is kind of like this double-edged sword, like just doing all the dirty work for John Philip Nichols and then
The
Marshall.
CIA.
Yeah, and the CIA.
The CIA's pulling the strings.
Exactly. So
They know he's already an informant for them, so go keep an eye on what's going on down there.
right, exactly. So the police are baffled on why this is going on, and they actually interview John Philip Nichols, and so I think the quote was, "A sociopath can help a psychopath."
Yeah, but who is who?
Exactly.
I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So we actually looked up these definitions, and we think Philip Arthur Thompson is a psychopath.
He is a psychopath.
So it's like, I think it's a psychopath and a psychopath.
I think Nichols is the sociopath.
Yeah.
So Paul Marasco was killed January 14th, 1982, which leads us into John Philip Nichols again. He, as we know, was running Cabazon. After the triple murder, we don't hear anything for a couple months from him. And then January 16th of 1985, he was arrested on murder, conspiracy, and solicitation charges, accused of planning to kill 2 women and 3 men. The killings were never carried out, as it was later found the men he hired were police informants.
Oh, great. That was a bad move.
He pleaded no contest, convicted of 2 counts, and sentenced to 4 years, and he really only did 2.
Why in the world, if you were involved with all these conspiracies going on, and you had all these different hitmen around you, would you go to an informant by accident to get 5 people killed? It seems like, hey guys, let me show you this really cool thing. You can see the stars in the middle of the reservation. Come sit right over here, and then a missile just hits you. That just
Maybe
seems
he went to the
logical.
CIA and was like, I want them killed. And they were like, no. And he's like, okay.
All right.
Or those police informants were CIA agents, and then they were like, yeah, we're tired of you, John Nichols, and we turned on him.
Huh,
Yeah,
maybe.
could be. I mean, he does have Philip Arthur Thompson to fall back on, but you know, I've read stories where Philip Arthur Thompson has actually been asked to murder people, and he was like not interested. So it was just kind of a whim for him if he wanted to do it or not.
So we don't know much about him after he got out of prison. There's not a lot of information out there about him. But in 2001, he died of a heart attack in India.
So John Philip Nichols is done.
He died at 74. And then the triple murder cold case lingered until 2007 when a cold case was opened up.
Exactly. So you have a police officer doing a cold case research, and really it wasn't much of a detective work, if you ask me, because it was very obvious who committed these murders. And it was a man by the name of Jimmy Hughes, who was a security officer at the Cabazon Indian Casino.
Correct.
And he was hired and admitted to it even back in the 80s that he had done this murder. And again, like we talked about before, murders happen and the police just don't investigate. Mm-hmm. And so what ended up happening is Jimmy Hughes, and this is a guy that if you see him, he was tied to the mafia in some way.
But he was also a mall cop.
Exactly.
Before this. So he really had no background of anything.
Yeah, and he looks like your typical henchman for the mafia. He really has the slicked back hair, and he has this incredible personality. And he used that personality to become a pastor. He was a born-again Christian, and he would go around everywhere, like in Honduras mostly, and he started his own church. And his whole gimmick was, I used to be a hitman, I used to be in the mafia, and now I've turned it around for Jesus, right?
Right.
So interesting personal note is that back when I had discovered that my father was a serial killer, we got on YouTube and was starting to look at all of these connections and things like that. And one of the people who were murdered, Ralph Boger, his daughter, Rachel Bagley,
correct,
I do believe, she goes by Desert Fae in a lot of her media. So I do believe Desert Fae, FAE.com, I think is her website. And never contacted her because, of course, she at one point thought that Philip Arthur Thompson may have been involved with the murder of her father. So I'm not going to contact her, of course. But she is a great gal. And we started following her on YouTube. And she knew that Jimmy Hughes, for sure.
She had done her own investigating ahead of law enforcement.
Exactly. So she had done all the work for these detectives. And there's also digital footage of him admitting to it in the 80s. So again, not much detective work there. Anyway, we would watch weekly these YouTube channels because there would always be something new with her. It was so very exciting because at one point he was coming into the U.S. to do some sort of revival or whatnot. And she brought her purse with a gun in it. Not that she was going to do anything. I think it was for her own protection. And she went up and she interviewed him with a microphone and a camera, but he didn't know it was there.
Wow.
And he was getting cornered by her. And while he didn't admit anything, he basically said, hey, you don't want to get into that mix. You don't want to go down that road. That's something that's way past in my life. And this is all dangerous. You don't want to get into this. But he basically alluded that, yeah, he was involved. And then later, that is when he came back into the U.S. again. You had this cop who was investigating the cold case. And then he arrested Jimmy Hughes.
In 2009.
Exactly. In Miami. And they extradited him into California. And again, it was all Desert Faye on this YouTube channel. Like, I was front seat and center. It was so exciting to watch this. And I thought, for once, they're gonna get the bad guy, right?
No,
not of course not.
Nope. All charges were dropped the following year on insufficient charges.
Right. I think that evidence was missing or destroyed. And this cop, he has no idea why. I mean, obviously he was guilty.
Yeah.
And he admitted that he was guilty. So he will probably never be in the U.S. again. And he's running his church in Honduras. And good for you, I guess.
We're not surprised.
Yeah.
By this time, how many people, especially your dad, have gotten off on minimal time being served?
Yeah.
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
Because if it's not of an interest to the CIA, they're not going to serve the time.
Yeah, they don't want them poking around in their business. No, drop the charges. You're fine.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
And speaking of poking around in your business, well, they don't like it when you do that.
No.
And so there was a guy, we've mentioned him a little bit before, and this is the main topic of the show on Netflix.
American Conspiracy, the Octopus Murders.
Exactly. And this is a gentleman, he is a reporter, an investigator named Danny Casolaro, and he was killed in a hotel in West Virginia on August 10th, 1991.
Yeah, and it was crazy because there was an individual maintenance man named Eric Wiedemann, and he was just having a normal day. And he gets a call by the housekeeping and says, hey, can you come check this out for us? And he's like, what's going on? Just come up here. This is all in the documentary, but he goes up there and he says it was the most disturbing thing he ever saw because when he arrived, he walked in, the bathroom was right to the left. He looked in the bathroom and there were bloody handprints and blood spray everywhere, all over the bathroom. And he was afraid to walk in until he looked through the crack in the door at the bathtub and he saw that it was filled with blood and there was a body. And so when police came to investigate it, they said it was horrific. And Danny Casolaro supposedly, according to the police reports, had committed suicide by slashing his wrists a total of 10 to 12 times. Not just once, 10 to 12, but so deeply that it cut the tendons on both arms. Now, people need to realize if you cut the tendons, you can't hold something.
How are you going to slash your other arm?
But he had both his wrists slashed. And by the way, he put a bag over his head too. And there was blood spray on the walls. Was he just flailing around? You wouldn't do that if you're committing suicide.
No, you would not.
Unless you've changed your mind.
Plus, he was also Catholic, which is a mortal sin.
But so this is a little pertinent for me because it's like, this is what started getting me nervous. When I started to discover everything about this, it's like when reporters and investigators get killed for just snooping a little bit, that makes you realize this is for real. Like, this is the real deal. And I was looking, in 2007, 2008, when I knew about all of this. So it got very real, and I did not want to mess with it because it's one thing if your dad's a serial killer. It's another when the government is going in and just eliminating everybody.
Yeah, when you're going down that rabbit hole.
Well, and speaking of eliminating, when they actually took his body, they didn't notify his family first. They actually took his body and embalmed it immediately, which means they took all the blood out, which means you could do no blood tests. And nothing was found in his hotel room but a suitcase and his clothes. All the notes, everything he always carried around in his briefcase, gone. Again, it's in the documentary. They go into great detail covering all this, but
it's really good.
It's fascinating.
And we've got to give it up to Danny Casolaro because he named this entire thing the octopus. He gave a name to it, and it's so difficult. It's hard for us to follow. I can't imagine being a listener and trying to follow this. It's just tough. So imagine what it's like to create this and to have all the tentacles of the octopus. We're just covering a few.
We're skimming the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah, those guys do a really good job on the Netflix. They have boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of material.
Yeah. So now we get to Michael Riconosciuto. And he was actually in contact with Danny Casolaro.
Correct.
And he was helping him with the investigating all of the computer stuff with Inslaw, right? He got into this through Inslaw first.
Correct.
Yep.
And the Promise software.
Then he did a little more digging, and then he found Michael Riconosciuto, and now Danny is dead. So Michael Riconosciuto says, hey, I don't want to be making meth anymore. I don't want to be, because he was probably still under John Phillip Nichols at this point in time. This is 91.
And everyone around him, I don't know when his father died, but everyone around him is disappearing or dying.
Exactly.
And so being the smart person who's holding everything together and creating new things, and you're involved with all these criminals, it's not a wise place to be.
So can you imagine the level of paranoia that you may have if your best friend that you were cooking meth with just all of a sudden dies and you know why? And you know the people you're working with probably did it, maybe even your own father.
Yes.
I mean, you've got to be like, anyone would be on pins and needles every single day.
You'd be terrified.
And so we've told you this before. This is a guy who says one thing and it's so crazy and it ends up being true. And then he says another thing and it's a total lie. And we don't know if he's just been doing this for survival, if he's crazy, if he's paranoid up to the gills. We just don't know.
Or if he has information, he's just piecing them together.
Right. It's just very hard to pin him down.
Correct.
Right? And he decides that he is going to testify before the House Judiciary Committee as far as the Inslaw case versus the Justice Department. Just a quick reminder, the Justice Department basically stole all the software from Inslaw.
Yep.
And so he modified all this software. So he's testifying against this.
Correct, because the House Committee is investigating the bankruptcy case of Inslaw versus the United States.
Exactly. So now he is admitting that he has ties to the Justice Department, has ties to the Reagan administration, and this is not going to go down well either.
No,
right?
under the direction of Earl Bryan, who I believe we mentioned in the last
Correct.
episode.
He's the guy who stole the software.
Yeah. The controlling shareholder and director of Hadron.
So Michael is going to testify, but he's heading up to Washington, state of Washington, where he originally lived.
Right. He's a Tacoma boy.
And so he's heading up there. Everything's good. I'm preparing myself. I'm going to testify. And what happens on a nice drive up to Washington? You get stopped by authorities. Not local authorities. Not the authorities you would assume would stop you for any reason. These are DEA agents, drug enforcement agents. Why do they randomly stop Michael Riconosciuto on the way up to Washington? Because they want to nail him for making meth.
Within 8 days of his declaration under the committee, he was arrested for conspiracy to manufacture, conspiracy to distribute, possession with intent to distribute, and with distribution, a total of 10 counts related to methamphetamine and methadone.
So let me get this straight. For years, he has been the golden boy making brand new technology, weapons, creating drugs, selling them on the black market, or selling them under the covers for the government, getting all this money for them. And then when all his friends and everybody around him die and he's uncomfortable and terrified, he's like, you know what? I got to share this and make sure I go public with this information. And at that point, that umbrella, that protection he had is completely removed. And they're like, yeah, we got to nail him.
You're not in the inner circle anymore.
No.
Nope.
So we know he made meth, and he might have had bags and bags and bags of meth with him. But this sentence 26-year prison sentence.
Excessive sentence.
It's unprecedented. Nobody has gone to jail for 26 years for the first time offense for meth.
Yep.
So what is going on? Well, they're eliminating the problem. And if they're not going to murder him, they're going to put him in jail for life, right?
Well, what's better than murdering other than to just make him sound crazy?
Exactly.
You're just a crazy guy throwing all this information out. You need to be locked up.
Yeah. And no offense to Mr. Riconosciuto, but he looks crazy, he talks crazy, and he acts crazy.
I think he is. But after 26 years in prison, you might be crazy too.
Right? Exactly. And again, he's this hot and cold guy where he says, aliens kidnapped me, and you find out it was true.
Yeah.
And then he's like, yeah, I finished my crossword puzzle and it's not true. And you're just like,
he's really hard to pin down.
So after all this chaos, nothing ever good comes from the tribe. Nothing ever good comes from anybody.
I just don't see the tribe becoming successful from anything that was involved in the past.
That smoke shop and that gambling.
Well, the Cabazon Band owns Fantasy Springs Resort Casino, 250-room hotel, the Palm Restaurant, Pizza Kitchen, Bistro, Fresh Grill Buffet, Joy Asian Cuisine, and a Starbucks.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. And it all started here. So let's recap all of this, shall we? The octopus is responsible for the very first Indian casino, Promise Software, the Justice Department stealing Inslaw software, the prelude to the Iran-Contra, making and selling drugs to finance gun running to facilitate war, triple murder on an Indian reservation, a murder torture of a drug financier, a supposed suicide of a reporter, a killer is released to the public.
Yep.
Boy Genius is arrested for 26 years. Lasers are being done. Meth, underwater drug labs. Dogs and cats are living together in sin. And no one seems to care.
So that's horrible. But my big question is, what happened to the hitman? Your dad.
That's a good question. I guess we'll cover that in the next episode.